Yes, it's time for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. And it's coming up to the one-year anniversary of a major change in the law, making the smacking of children illegal in Wales, with Scotland having introduced a similar law in 2020. Pressure is now growing from child protection groups to introduce the same law in England. So is it time to toughen the law to protect kids? Or is the right to scold your child with a slap on the wrist or a tap on the bum part of parenting? That's tonight's big question. Should smacking be a criminal offence across the whole of Britain? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome mother, most importantly, and Deputy Leader of UKIP, a very good friend of the show, Rebecca Jane, and parenting, youth and confidence coach, Kalini Kent. Kalini, great to have you on the show. I believe it's your first appearance on Mark Dolan tonight. You're very welcome. What do you think about smacking? Surely a tap on the wrist wouldn't do any child too much harm.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. I think that, yes, some parents have got a challenging time, and we recognise that, parenting isn't easy. However, it shows that it's really, so many countries have actually outlawed it already. And I think there are two main points here. First of all, the legality side of it. There are laws against hitting an adult, it's assault. There are laws against harming your pet or hitting them. And so why should children have lesser rights? Every child really needs discipline, they need boundaries, and, it's an essential part of parenting. But there is a big difference between disciplining and physical punishment. And there are other ways of actually getting your child, giving them the guidance and the support they need, and so that their behaviour is appropriate. So I think that's the first main point. And the other thing to bear in mind as well is the psychological and long-term impact on the child. I mean, there's a quote that, when you shout or you hit or you criticise a child, they don't love you less, but they love themselves less. And I think it's really significant that children are looking to their parents, who are their main, carers, or whoever their carer is, to actually learn the behaviours that are appropriate. So if your parent's hitting you or reacting to your behaviour by hitting you, the child will think that violence is an appropriate way to respond to anger or to their bad behaviour. And what will then happen is they're learning that behaviour, that it's okay to hit, and they'll continue that into other areas of their life and other patterns in their life. And, it can also have, it's been proven, it has a really, really marked impact on them long term into their adulthood, because it's making them maybe feel less worthy of love and affection from their parents, and they're not good enough, and it leads to them having long-term effects into adulthood, and it can be like a trauma for them, depending on the severity, of course. But I do feel that there is a lot to be said for finding other ways of parenting which don't involve physical harm to the child.
Rebecca Jane, you've been giving us some Emily Maitlis-style eye rolls, so you disagree?
Oh, Mark, absolutely, I disagree. I don't even particularly know where to begin on this. So obviously, if we're saying about the psychological impact on a child, why on earth are we now not all absolutely, out there on the streets having fights every 10 seconds? Because my generation and the generations previous to me were the generations that were grown up with, being given a slap. And we're talking about a slap. We're not talking about hit. I think I heard the word hit used a couple of times. That's a very different process than what we're talking about. We're not talking about abusing children. We're talking about parents having the right to parent their children and not living in this nanny state where we're expecting the government to tell us what we can and we can't do. Because how far do we take that? When the government is stepping in and telling us exactly the amount of discipline that we're allowed to give our children, are they then allowed to start telling us the vaccines that we have to give our children? We are parents. We're very good at our jobs. My children haven't been raised with this notion of, not being able to smack them when appropriate. In actual fact, I think that the youngest one has probably been slightly smacked twice in her whole entire life. She's a fantastically behaved child. She absolutely knows that I love them. And to put everybody into this one net of saying that now they're all of a sudden not going to feel like they're loved and they're going to love themselves less is nonsense. We're parents. Let us parent.
Also, Kalini, I wonder whether a tool in the arsenal of parents is the threat of a robust physical response. So it's not a case of slapping children all the time, but if you do that again, you will get an almighty smack, right? You're actually not planning on doing it. It's just hyperbole. It's an empty threat, but it makes the child think twice. For example, now I can think of an occasion when my eldest son was very small and he ran out into the road and he could have been killed. So I manhandled him. I made it on purpose uncomfortable, that I physically manhandled him back onto the pavement, and I held him firmly. It can't have been pleasant for him. I didn't slap him, but I was just physical and robust. And I said, if you do that again, you will be in a world of trouble. You could have got hit by one of those cars. Now, my son won't forget that encounter. It's about saving his life. However, if a police officer was present under this law, I could probably wind up in court.
I think there is a bit of there's an element of reasonableness here, and I think that what in response to the opposing discussion, which is, I feel that this is fear-based parenting. You're actually exerting a lot of fear on that child by threatening them with the physical punishment. Whereas there are other ways. We have to give our children boundaries, just like we do with adults. People learn what is reasonable behaviour and what the boundaries are. And similarly, we learn that what is acceptable behaviour to another human being. Your child, they need their emotional needs met. They also need to know that they're cared for and loved for. And if the person who loves them the most and who they are looking to for guidance and boundaries and support, and to know how they are going to how they should run their life and the values that they're going to live by, bearing in mind that a child's values are actually starting to establish from the age of 2, very well ingrained by the age of 7. So if they are brought up with that feeling of they're going to be physically harmed if they do something wrong, it can set up fears in them, and it can be traumatic. And I understand that we're maybe dealing here with just the three of us, of people who don't take it that step further. But there are children. Where does a small smack go? Where does it stop? Does it become another smack and a harder smack the next time?
Briefly, and Kalini, of course, we'll all agree with that. The idea of violence towards children is truly horrific and abhorrent. And indeed, we have laws to stop that from happening. Isn't that enough? You're not allowed to beat up your children.
Well, you say there are laws, but actually there's the defence of reasonable sort of provocation, that you can actually do that to your child. However, it's a test of reasonableness, and at the end of the day, there must be something to be said. Sweden brought out the law in 1979. 63 other countries have brought that law out to protect children because they have less of a voice. Okay.
Rebecca Jane, final thoughts?
Yeah, you're talking about the test of reasonableness. The actual test is that if you leave a bruise or a mark, then that's when you could be prosecuted. And that's perfectly acceptable, because then we're talking about the grounds of abuse. We're not talking about smacking a child. Those laws are there now. They already exist. We're already governed by them. They are absolutely perfectly fine. They don't need to be changed, because parents should be reasonable enough themselves to know when they're going too far with their parenting, and we shouldn't have to intervene. We have a society of decent and wonderful human beings, and we don't need people like yourself, with all due respect, and the government telling us how to parent our children. I certainly do not have 2 children that have been brought up with fear and all the rest of the horrifically awful, tarnishing names that you're now using. They've been brought up pretty wonderfully, and we should allow parents to be parents.
Kalini Kent, I thoroughly enjoyed your first appearance on the show. I look forward to many more. Parenting, youth and confidence coach Kalini Kent, and the deputy leader of UKIP, and very caring mother, of course, Rebecca Jane. Thank you both. We've been asking you, the great British public, your view. In a Twitter poll, we've asked a simple question: should smacking your child be a criminal offence across the UK? 11% say it should be an offence. 89% say no. The people have spoken.